So in this video we will learn about active and passive voice. So what do you mean by active and passive voice? Now you can write a sentence in two ways, using the active voice or the passive voice. So look at the two sentences given here. Arjuna killed Karna. This is written in the active voice. Karna was killed by Arjuna is written in the passive voice. So look at the subjects of these two sentences. In the first sentence, Arjuna is the subject and Arjuna is the doer of the action. What is the action he did? He killed Karna. Now the second sentence also conveys the same meaning. However, the subject has been shifted. Here the subject is Karna. And is Karna doing an action? No. He is not doing the action. Rather, he is the receiver of the action, or he is being acted upon. So it's on the basis of this, whether the subject is the doer of the action or whether he or it is the receiver of the action, that we divide sentences into active and passive voice. So when the subject does the action, we say that it's written in the active voice. Here Arjuna killed Karna. When the subject is the receiver of the action, Karna was killed by Arjuna, then we say that the sentence is written using the passive voice. So all sentences in English, cannot be written in both voices. So sentences containing intransitive and linking verbs cannot be passivized, cannot be written in the passive sense. So look at the first sentence. He is speaking loudly. Speaking is an intransitive verb here. It is not followed by an object. It does not require an object. So such verbs cannot be used in the passive form, which do not have an object. Look at the second sentence. Ravi is an architect. Here is an example of a linking verb. This also does not have an object. A complement follows the verb, not an object. So such a type of sentence also cannot be turned into the passive voice. Now there are certain rules that we have to follow in order to turn a sentence from its active form to passive form. So now let us take a look at those rules. So in passive sentences, we use by to indicate the person or thing that does or causes the action. So what is passive voice? When the subject contains the word that receives the action, then we say that we have written the sentence in passive voice. So the object of the sentence will be the person who does the action. So we have to attach the word by along with that object. So the child, when we write a sentence in the active voice, the child took away the toy. Child is the one performing the action. Now when we turn the sentence into passive voice, how do we turn it into passive voice? We shift the subject. The object in the active voice is turned into the subject in the passive voice. So the toy becomes the subject, was taken away. We have to change the verb form when we turn a sentence into the passive voice. Took away changes into was taken away. So we'll look at the rules for changing the verb form later. Now, the toy was taken away should be followed by the word by, and the previous subject has now turned into the object, the child. So this is how you turn a sentence in the active voice to the passive voice. We shift the position of the subject and object. We change the verb form and we add by to the noun which performs the action, which will occur in the object position when written in the passive voice. Okay. Now, another rule: when a verb in the active voice is followed by a preposition plus object, the preposition must be placed after the verb. Now look at the sentence. We must not make fun of him. This is written in the active voice. The verb here is make fun of. It's a verbal phrase. Okay. So when you turn the sentence into the passive voice, this preposition should be placed in the passive voice also. You cannot omit it. So when we write this sentence in the passive voice, first we interchange the position of the object and the subject. So him will come into the subject position. So when him comes to the subject position, we have to write he. Now we have to take care of the verb must not be made fun of. So we retain the verb and the preposition. Next example, the police brought in the culprit. The verb here is, the verbal phrase is brought in. We have to retain the preposition in. Okay. So the culprit becomes the subject in the passive voice. The culprit was brought in is the modification given to the verb. We add by to indicate who is doing the action, by the police. Okay. Now this is the most important rule that we have to keep in mind when we turn active to passive. In order to turn active into passive voice, we have to identify the tense of the sentence and modify the sentence accordingly. This is what I said we will learn later. The verb form changes according to the tense of the sentence. So now we'll take a look at how sentences in different tenses will be converted into passive voice. So we have already gone through the tenses. So if you are given a sentence in simple present, the way you have to modify the verb is thus: is, am or are plus past participle. Now whenever you turn a sentence into the passive voice, verb form will always be the V3 form or the past participle, but the auxiliary verbs that you add along with this past participle form will change according to the tense of the sentence, right? So for simple present, you have to add either of these three auxiliary verbs, is, am or are, depending on the person and the number of the subject. Okay. So he writes poems. the first thing you have to do in order to turn this sentence into the passive voice is you have to shift the position of the object and subject. Poems should become the subject in the passive voice. So poems is placed as the first word in the new sentence, poems. Now, how would you change the verb writes? Look at the subject. The subject is in the plural form. So, what auxiliary word will you pick? You will pick are. Are. Now, past participle of writes is written. Are written. Now, you have to add the preposition by before the new object, which is now the doer of the action. So, we add by and then we add uh, the old subject, that is he. He has to turn into him because now it is occurring in the object position. Okay. Now let's look at the next tense, present continuous. So if a sentence is given in present continuous, the verb form in the passive voice will be is, am, are according to the subject plus being plus past participle. So he is writing poems. Shift the subject and object. Poems, because it's plural, the subject is plural. We have to choose are, being written, add a by, and the new object him. He is converted into him. Present perfect. The verb form, new verb form in the passive voice will be have or has according to the number and person of the subject plus been plus past participle. So if the sentence in the active voice is he has written several poems, shift the subject, several poems, have because the subject is plural, been past participle, written by him. Simple past. The passive voice form would be was or were according to the subject plus past participle. So he wrote several poems yesterday. So the object will now change position into the subject. Several poems will become the subject. Because it's plural, we choose the verb form were, past participle written, preposition by, and the new object him, followed by the adverb yesterday. Past continuous. If the sentence is given in past continuous, the form in the passive voice would be was or were according to the subject plus being plus past participle. He was writing poems all morning. Poems were being written by him all morning. Past perfect. The passive voice would be had been plus past participle. So if the sentence is he had written several poems had been written by him. So here for past perfect, it doesn't matter what the subject is, whether it is plural or whether it is any person. The auxiliary verb is the same for everything. It's the same for everything. Had been plus past participle. So here you don't have to worry about the number and person of the subject. Now the last form of passive voice If an auxiliary, a modal verb is given in the sentence, like can, would, might, shall, we learned a long list of such words, modal verbs. If modal verbs appear in the sentence, the verb form is the auxiliary plus be. We add a be plus the past participle. So he ought to write poems. Ought to is the auxiliary verb here. So poems plus auxiliary verb ought to plus be. Ought to be plus past participle written. You add a by him, the new object here. Okay, so these are the basic rules in order to turn a sentence from active to passive voice. Now, from the next slide, we will do a few examples, several examples of the several kinds of sentences and some special usages. So, look at this sentence. Someone stole the watch. Okay, here the subject is, this is written in the active voice. Someone is the subject, someone is the person doing the action, but the subject is unspecified here, right? So it is not important. We don't exactly know who stole the watch. So we can omit the agent. It's okay to not mention who is doing the action. So when we turn this sentence into the passive voice, how do we turn it into the passive voice? Interchange the subject and object. So the watch will become the subject. The tense is, what is the tense of the sentence? Simple past. Stole is simple past. So simple past can be converted thus. The subject is singular, so you add the auxiliary verb was plus past participle stolen. The watch was stolen. Now who is doing the action? Someone. So that will turn into the object, new object. And you add a by before the doer of the action, right? So the watch was stolen by someone is correct. However, it is okay to not mention by someone because it's not exactly specified who is doing the action, right? It's some person. So it's unimportant. So you can omit the by someone part of the sentence. So the watch was stolen is also correct. So they speak English and French in Canada. How can you turn it into the passive voice? English and French is the new subject. English and French are spoken. The sentence is in simple present tense. The subject is plural, so we choose are and then the past participle are spoken in Canada. So we omit, what do we omit? By them is not used here. It's okay to use it, it's okay to not use it. So English and French are spoken by them in Canada. English and French are spoken in Canada. Both ways are correct. Now, another kind of sentence. Here, they gave me a prize. There are two objects here. Me is known as the indirect object and prize is the direct object. So how do you turn such a sentence into passive voice? There are two methods. You can make either of the objects the new subject. So if I am making me, the indirect object, as the new subject, I, then you have to add the appropriate verb form. Gave is in past tense. So past tense, when you turn it into passive voice, it turns into was, because the subject is I, the appropriate auxiliary verb is was plus past participle given, followed by the object, the direct object, a prize. The second way is you make prize into the subject. A prize was given to me. So you add the preposition to the new to the indirect object. Now, how do you turn questions into the passive voice? Let's look at this example. When did they buy the car? This is a question with a WH word. So you begin the sentence with the WH word. Okay, when. Now check the tense. Did they buy the car? Did indicates simple past tense. So simple past tense in there, what is the rule? Was or were plus past participle. Okay, so what is the verb here? The verb is buy. So the form, and what is the subject here? The new subject should be the car. See, look at the order of the sentence. They buy the car is in the passive voice, is in the active voice, because they is the word that is performing the action. They perform the action by. Now when you turn it into the passive voice, the car should become the subject. So the car should be the subject. So in a sentence, in an interrogative sentence or a question, you change the word order. It's not subject followed by the verb. It is the auxiliary verb followed by the subject, then followed